The New York Football Giants continue their free agency work, this time dipping into the trade waters, acquiring Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders in exchange for the compensatory pick 100 received in the Kansas City trade during the season for Kadarius Toney. We break down the trade, the contract, the fit, and the impact that Darren Waller can have for Big Blue. Yes, my friends, on a Tuesday when news happens, you try to get on and talk about it as soon as possible. Thank you for joining in with me here. If you were in earlier when we had the discussion, obviously around the addition into the defensive unit at the linebacker position, thank you. And thank you for coming back in for this as well, because this is the other kind of breaking news, the news that we've been waiting on. How are the New York Football Giants and Joe Schoen going to improve this team specifically on the offensive side of the ball and finding a way to add weapons for Daniel Jones, add a playmaker at a position of need, and certainly avoid some of the discussions we were talking about when it came to the draft. When is the right time to target a tight end? You no longer have to put that on the board, and this impacts the team in more than just that one area of need. But let's start at the highest level with what's been reported. Of all the usual suspects, I'll accredit Adam Schefter here just because you're over on Twitter and all the information is coming fast and furious. Darren Waller, who has also been reported the Packers offered a second-round pick at the deadline last season or previously. That was rejected. Now, compensatory third for Darren Waller. This is, as I said at the top, the pick that was acquired from the Kansas City Chiefs along with a sixth-rounder in exchange for Kadarius Toney. So big bird's eye view here for a second. If we're going to talk about Darren Waller, we have to look at it through the lens of not only the player, and we'll talk about his fit, but this is effectively what Joe Schoen has converted Kadarius Toney into, right? A first-round pick from a previous regime in season, makes the trade, third-round pick, sixth-round pick that they'll have in the upcoming draft. Maybe they'll end up using that, in another deal as well. But they've now converted Kadarius Toney into Darren Waller and a sixth-round pick. And Darren Waller, who will be 31 in the upcoming season, obviously does have some injury concerns. We'll discuss that as well. He is a high-level playmaker at the tight end position and frankly, is a versatile weapon that the Giants are going to be able to use in a lot of different ways, and he's going to impact this team in a number of different ways just from his presence on the field. As everyone joins in here, obviously live on YouTube, we first thank you. And second, just reiterate very quickly, the New York Football Giants are acquiring Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders in exchange for the compensatory third-round pick number 100, which they received, the Giants did, in the trade with the Kansas City Chiefs for Kadarius Toney over this past season. Talking points to bring up here. First and foremost, as we'll get into it, he will be 31 years old in the upcoming season. We'll discuss his stats, the games played or missed this past year. But from a contract standpoint, this is a contract that occupies $11.875 million on the cap in 2023. However, the potential out of this contract is after the upcoming season, the 2-year, $24.3 million. He has no guaranteed money locked in when we go forward into years 2, 3, and 4 of what would be his time with the New York Football Giants. That's for a later date. But the bottom line is you do give yourself flexibility around this. It's a weapon that we're going to discuss at length here, but you don't have to find yourself in a position where you have to worry about being tied to big money for a weapon like Darren Waller, who may have some injury concerns as he gets to 33 and 34 years old. But in the short term, this is a receiving tight end weapon that the Giants have not had in a long time. We know that they've taken some stabs at it in recent years in different forms and fashion, but none have been the caliber of offensive weapon that Darren Waller represents for this team coming in the door. And what do we mean by weapon? You go back and you take a look at it, as I said there a moment ago, originally drafted by Baltimore, but in his time in Oakland, going back over these last handful of seasons, remember, 9 games played this past year, 6 games started, had the injuries, obviously, but 43 targets, 28 receptions for 388. The most attractive sample size for Darren Waller is going to be going back to 2019 and 2020, when over a complete season, didn't start one game in 2020. He had 117 targets, 90 catches, very reliable in terms of bringing down balls that are being thrown his way. 1,145 yards and 3 touchdowns that following year, a massive year. 107 receptions on 145 targets, 9 touchdowns, and almost 1,200 receiving yards. You're talking about nearly 23 plus 100 yards over that 2-year stretch. And even last year, just 11 games, still 55 catches on 93 targets, not nearly as strong of a ratio, but 655 yards, a very attractive over that 3-4-year stretch, even going back to 2018. 2018 was a do-nothing year for him. Only 4 games, none started, but a 12-yard per reception average for this player. Absolutely electric in terms of Joe Schoen going out and finding a way to go acquire a weapon. And reports are the Giants aren't done yet. So we'll continue to monitor what else they may add here, thinking of wide receiver. Is it going to be a free agent? And how does it shift a little bit here? When we were talking earlier this morning, after getting off of the defensive side of things, it was, what are the versions of what the Giants can try to do? How can they manufacture an opportunity where they don't need to, in the first round, feel like they have to force it for a wide receiver, or even in the second round? Well, this is the first step in doing that. You can go back to free agency now, look at the wide receivers that are available, see who doesn't get the early free agent contract that they're looking for, and maybe some of those numbers come down. 3 years for $33 million for Jacoby Meyer. That's setting a benchmark of sorts here. There are other players out there that are going to command or try to command more money than that. But if the Giants can find a way to attract another player, maybe on a more team-friendly deal, certainly, and just put a consistent player into that rotation, now you can start to think about how Darren Waller opens things up for other players on this offense. We go ahead and throw it up here for Pistol Pete. Well, I know it's 27 Pete, but Pistol Pete. I'm sure that's what you wanted to go for, and you had to use 27 based on other people occupying it. What a steal. Turning Tony into Waller is a massive upgrade. Yeah, listen, you can look at it one of two ways. What the talent was in Kadarius Toney, that's a previous regime. I've said this all along. When you change GMs, when you bring in a new coaching staff, what the previous regime did is not an issue for the new regime going forward in terms of draft capital spent or money that has been allocated to them. You have to make smart decisions to continue to build out your team in a strong way. Now let's talk about how Darren Waller impacts this roster when we look at the offensive side of the ball. There are the very easy ones here that we can discuss. Let's stay inside the tight end room. Daniel Bellinger is a young, very exciting, developing tight end that showed us a lot as a rookie this past season. Dealt with the injury, the very scary injury at one point that he was thankfully able to come back from. But when you now go into this room and you think about putting a player like Darren Waller ahead of him, alongside him, the versatility that that's going to create now is a field stretcher in Darren Waller. He can take those seam routes up the field and pull linebacking coverage, He can pull safety coverage away. He's going to take attention and bring it up the field. And that's not to limit what Darren Waller can be, but even that function alone, when we think about what the impact is going to be, all of a sudden, it does two things for me, really, if I'm thinking about this in real time. One, it opens up that middle of the field, those intermediate passing routes for Daniel Bellinger. We know he's not the fleetest of foot, but he's a very strong route runner. He's been shown he's a strong pass catcher. When he gets that ball in his hands, he can get himself turned upfield and get you some yards. Space. Let's create space underneath there for Daniel Bellinger to operate in. I also think if you're just talking about big picture for the New York Giants, the thing that I actually like a lot about this too is it allows Daniel Bellinger, to develop his overall play at a consistent basis. You no longer have to look at Daniel Bellinger and say, well, yes, if we want to have you in line and trying to do some blocking contributions in the run game or in pass protection, we want you to focus on that. But also, we need you to leak out. We need you to grab key first downs. We need you to move the chains on third downs for us. We need you to be a touchdown catching tight end playmaker. All of those things are on the table in the mold of a traditional New York Football Giant tight end. But now you get to say, We've got a guy that can do some of that more offensive work so you can actually focus in on consistent development as a all-phase tight end. I think that there is not a risk, but there is the risk reward of pushing a young player to be more of a weapon and not allowing or affording him the time to develop the complement of skill sets. So I think that's just a bonus when we talk about this, in addition to opening up the underneath. Now you expand it out from beyond that. Think about the wide receiver room when you have a player like Darren Waller on this roster. And if we just take one more brief second to touch in on the wide receiver room, want to make sure that we highlight that Daniel Bellinger, who missed time with that eye injury, but came back and was okay and was able to be a contributor down the stretch of this season as well. This is a player that in his rookie campaign showed up and gave you 12 games, 30 receptions on 35 targets. We always loved that ratio. You throw the ball his way, he brings it in. Nearly a 9 yards per catch average and 2 touchdowns on the year as well. Really a lot to like about him in that regard. And the continued develop for Daniel Bellinger is obviously going to be excellent. That's a 4th round pick, 112 in last year's draft class, immediately having an impact on this team. But you don't want to put too much on his plate, so you go get Darren Waller. Now let's take it a next level here. The step beyond it is, how does this impact the rest of the wide receiver room? Because Darren Waller is as much a receiver as he is a tight end. And now we can think about 2 facets of it. As the roster is currently constructed in this moment, we have Isaiah Hodgins brought back. You can look at him as being an outside wide receiver, not calling him a number 1, but that's where you can play him. Big body, show that he can run the routes, understands the system under Dable, under Kafka, and has been a consistent player. You can rely on him as well. Then it's Wan'Dale Robinson, right? 2nd round pick, a player that the Giants are very excited about, but had the injury concerns. In a lot of ways, just like we talked about Daniel Bellinger and the underneath routes over the middle, right? What can Darren Waller help contribute? Let's go ahead and create more space underneath there. Let's make less congestion where Wan'Dale Robinson is getting the ball in tight spaces, getting it inside with a cornerback, slot corner on him, with a linebacker spacing over in zone coverage, with a safety coming down. The opportunities now for Daniel Jones in this offense to say, on a given down and distance, we're going to be able to present to you options that we have in consistent intermediate tight end routes for Bellinger, in dynamic playmaking, ball in his hands opportunities for Wan'Dale Robinson, which can happen over the middle, underneath routes, and behind the line of scrimmage and bubble screens. And we're going to take that pressure away from the line of scrimmage as well with Darren Waller and afford whoever the other wide receivers are going to be, including Hodgins here, the opportunities to have success in some one-on-one opportunities. You can dream on Sterling Shepard being healthy. Sure. You can consider the idea of, even if Darius Slayton ends up being the player that comes back to the Giants, even in that instance, like let's start with the lowest level of expectations for this offseason in the draft. Darius Slayton is not going to be a guy like we saw last season that the defense gets to pay a lot of attention to and take away. He's not a number 1 wide receiver, but he has speed. He can stretch the field. Now you're talking about having multiple players that can get this thing down the field for you and create some mismatches and create spacing in the intermediate and underneath passing attack. So Darren Waller's ability is going to be across the board here. He flexed out into the slot. He can be moved around the formation on the outside. So a much more dynamic playmaker at the tight end position than the Giants have had in a long time. And it starts to open up a lot of possibilities here for the New York Football Giants. Then we talk on the backfield as well, obviously. Saquon Barkley, passing game, certainly. Darren Waller is a big-bodied tight end. He can contribute in the blocking game as well. So I'm not selling him short in just one facet, but obviously you want to use him in the most dangerous possible ways. It's going to help in that way, and it's going to help, again, Saquon Barkley out of the backfield. Matt Breida brought back on his contract after playing last year with this team. Went over his stats earlier today. Even though the sample size is actually pretty small because he didn't play in a significant amount of games, still showed you a sample size that tells you he can be productive. These guys are going to have more space to operate. These players are going to have better alleyways, better avenues in the run game, because even when you're thinking about beyond blocking for any of the tight ends in this group, just the fact that you have playmaking threats at the position means that you have to respect the possibility of which way Daniel Jones is going to go with that ball from under center, play action opportunities, rolling out, and then think about in dual tight end sets how you're going to have a different type of but still two versions of playmakers at your tight end position, along with the wide receiver complements. Absolutely, you can read and see the way in which Darren Waller can have a big impact. Now, the other side of this is that there are some injury concerns for Darren Waller. And that's why I'm not cooling off on this. It's a great move by the Giants, converting a third round compensatory, effectively a early fourth round pick into Darren Waller. You love it. You love the fact that the contract, as I mentioned there, about the possibilities of having outs. That's great. But in the world that it does work out, you're going to be talking about a guy into 24, 25, and 26 when, yes, he will be 32, 33, and 34 years old, only occupying 12, 13, and $15 million on the cap. The cap is going to go up over the next couple of seasons. So it's still going to be a very friendly contract as well when it comes to keeping someone that hopefully, as he ages here, can still be productive, can be healthy, can be on the field for you. So the other side of the coin is that you have a very controllable veteran tight end if he can continue to be a dynamic playmaker for this team. Now we get to the Daniel Jones piece of it. Right. So if you look at some of these moves now, some things like a 26-year-old linebacker in Okikiri, you're going to have the obviously control of his prime, right? 4 years, $40 million. You're bringing him in to be a staple inside the middle of this defense. But when you talk about a move like this for Waller and you talk about the Daniel Jones contract, this is the thing that we were hoping they would do more of last offseason, even though we understood it was going to be difficult. Give me playmakers, continue to take away the question marks about, well, is Daniel Jones as good as he's shown himself to be, or is he being held back by the players around him? So you go and get him a playmaker at the tight end position. They're going to add receiving weapons here too. So when we walk into this training camp and into this season, whatever your thoughts or expectations around Daniel Jones have been, there's going to be far less opportunity for excuses if you're a fan or if you're someone inside the building. Who doesn't make excuses? Daniel Jones. The coaching staff, right? Have to be smart, have to make the right plays, have to find a way to be successful on Sunday. So in this iteration of it, somebody asked over on social, is this the best receiving player that Daniel Jones has had in his 4 years? I would very easily not make the argument, just the factual statement. If Sterling Shepard is healthy, he is the best player that Daniel Jones has had to throw to. But if Darren Waller is going to be on the field and we don't know what the state of Sterling Shepard is going to be, yes, this is a reliable, consistent, downfield playmaking weapon. And honestly, something that we'll talk about more is too, remember, Daniel Jones, you have to go back 2 years on it because they didn't do a lot of it this past season. But over the course of the start of his young career, he has been one of the more accurate downfield passers in the NFL. He doesn't throw them as often as a lot of quarterbacks, but when he does it, he has been very productive and very accurate. Darren Waller is the type of player with his size and athleticism. Those high point opportunities downfield are something that he should be able to excel at in a way that you haven't seen from a Darius Slayton, in a way that you haven't seen from an Isaiah Hodgins. And by the way, different expectations for these players, right? 5th round draft picks, 4th round rookie tight ends. It's going to take time for some young players to get there. And then it's going to be just the reality for some veteran players and what they're capable of. That being the case, to reboot it back to the top here, we'll have a little discussion if you're in over on the live YouTube conversation for a few minutes as well. The New York Football Giants are sending the 3rd round compensatory pick, number 100, received in the Kansas City trade, along with the 6th round pick for Kadarius Toney, in exchange for Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders, a pass-catching tight end who has multiple 1,000 receiving yard seasons to his name, and who just 2 years ago, you can look back at the stats and see a player capable of being very close to double-digit touchdowns and certainly a high-impact player for this offense. Remind everybody quickly here, you get over to YouTube, you turn on the alerts, you follow the One Giant podcast with myself and Andy Makowitz, you get over to social, at One Giant Podcast, at Adam Armbrecht, and of course, wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled, because all free agency long, as we approach the draft, as often as we can, when news breaks, we're going to come in, break it down for you, and then have the conversation with you. So greatly appreciate the support that we get. Let's keep it up as the New York Football Giants and Joe Schoen continue to add talent to this roster on both sides of the ball in the free agency period, whether on the open market or via trade. All right, we're going to chop that one up and put it out there on the podcast feed for anyone looking for the update around Darren Waller. But now we get to say hi to some new faces now, which is great. like Robert, who came in for this one, wasn't here in the earlier session. That's not a knock on you, Robert. We can't all just be hanging out waiting for me to show up on YouTube. Love this move. Nice to have a confident GM. That's a both and right there, right? It's nice to have the player, and it's also nice to have a GM that can go out and make a move like this. Pistol back in here. I feel like Waller in the red zone will leave Bellinger wide open in many cases. Yes. We laid out a lot of the possibilities there in terms of how he can impact this roster. When we get to the red zone, when we get inside that 20, not only do you have the high point player who can go attack it, you can put Isaiah Hodgins into that category. He's a bigger wide receiver. And then I think you look at a Wan'Dale Robinson and you look at a Daniel Bellinger in different ways, but as being capable as being the beneficiaries of what's happening with some of the bigger boys, including now Darren Waller, right? The safety over the top help. You're going to try to jam and press them at the line of scrimmage. Linebackers are going to have to respect what comes out of the backfield with Saquon Barkley, with a Matt Breida, the legs of Daniel Jones. And now all of a sudden, those quick little underneath routes for Wan'Dale Robinson, and something we saw in his rookie season for Daniel Bellinger, those little up and out routes, 5 yards and out. And then we remember that great game where he had that catch, managed to turn it upfield, get himself to that edge, and get to that pylon. So 100%, there's going to be different ways in which now this team can attack defenses, specifically when it comes to the red zone. Saigai Bry, who was in on the earlier session, comes in. If DW is on the field, obviously he means Darren Waller for everybody out there. Darkwing Duck. I'm not even sorry. I grew up in the 90s. I was born in the 80s, but there could be a nickname coming. Who knows for sure. When Waller is on the field, a lot of this will be fantastic. I had no idea this was even a possibility. The one thing we can tell you right now is the things that have happened so far in this early free agent period haven't been things that we expected. Going and getting Bobby there, obviously formerly from the Colts, wasn't the expected name that we thought the Giants would go target. A trade like this was interesting. I'm not giving myself a pat on the back, but at the time of the Kadarius Toney trade, the way that I remember framing it was, what has he done? He's given himself draft capital to go make decisions and moves, whether it's in the draft and targeting a replacement wide receiver, adding a tight end, adding a weapon on either side of the ball. But it was, hey, you can do that. And you also have some capital to say, if the opportunity comes up here, maybe we can go make a trade and not feel like we're stripping away our assets when it comes to the draft. Now you've taken away a third-round pick that you didn't have at the start of last season, so it doesn't change anything in terms of the way you can approach the draft next month, and you get yourself a weapon like this. Tommy, who is also here on the early session, would have loved to get Brooks with our third, but proven tight end works. Him and Bellinger will kill it. Yeah, listen, the other thing I think that does open up here, when you see a pick get spent, you go, now, what else would I maybe have used this for, right? What were the other possibilities if we're opening up the idea of taking this draft capital and spending it somewhere? But I don't think how you can look at this any other way, as you're saying, than being, hey, this tandem is great. The potential is great. Now it's about getting on the field together and executing. Ross hopping in here. Pairing Bellinger and Waller together is going to be dangerous. Yeah, I think what you're talking about now is a tandem that occupies the underneath, intermediate, and deep portions of the field over the middle for you. That's not exclusive, but inside of those parameters, in between the hashes, now all of a sudden you have two players that you can rely on in different versions, in different ways, and then it opens things up for the receivers on the outside, for underneath combinations, and for the running backs out of the backfield as well, let alone, I mentioned it kind of respecting the legs of Daniel Jones. Remember, when you stretch the field and you get guys away from the line of scrimmage, Daniel Jones and his mobility comes into play there as well. You have to like the idea that we always talk about him using his legs, but now you can say you can scamper a little bit more easily when, rather than, and not a knock on, but rather than a Daniel Bellinger, moving 5 to 10 yards away from the line of scrimmage where linebackers underneath in zone, over the top safety help, they can still keep an eye in the backfield and try to close the gap if Jones looks to run. Now, if you can send Waller, another wide receiver, right? Wan'Dale Robinson, when you move them away from the line of scrimmage, now Daniel Jones can pick up healthy yards without some of that risk maybe of the injuries, of the big hits, right? Scamper for the first down. Get out of bounds after 7 to 10 yards and go ahead and reset the down and distance for us. We continue to look through, and I really want to make sure that I highlight a number of the new people that have come in here, which I really appreciate. Always be a part of the OGP crew. We don't need Waller that good. He gone Butterfinger Waller. Oh, no. Oh, I see. I see a little Raider action here. from Lewis. That's all right, man. You know, it's funny. I will just say, pointing out in the stats there, you saw how one of the highlights that I was bringing up was when you look at his stats and what he had done over the course of his career. One of the things that you really liked was looking back into 2019 and 2020, right? I mentioned, especially 2019, 90 catches on 117 targets, right? Good for a catch percentage of 76.9. Follows it up with 73.8. And then a big time drop off in 2021, just 59%. Last year, limited action, 9 games, 6 started, 65%, getting back up into the right direction there. Listen, if you're a Raiders fan, sure, show up and shed a tear. Try to dismiss the excitement that Big Blue fans are going to have for adding Darren Waller. He's not, listen, you know what I mean? He's not a 22-year-old tight end. This isn't Travis Kelce from 10 years ago and you're walking in the door saying we've locked this thing up. But he greatly improves what this position is for the Giants. And there's very much an excitement around what he can be for this team. Something like this. Let's go. That's what we're talking about, right? Add a weapon to this group. Add a weapon for Daniel Jones and just feel like, unlike last offseason and leading towards the draft, we knew there's going to be a lot of restrictions for what Joe Schoen was going to be able to accomplish, going to be issues in trying to commit money, find money, finagle money. And this offseason, even though it's not 100% perfect, there's still the Leonard Williams restructuring potentially, the extension for Dexter Lawrence. They've earmarked Kenny Golladay to be let go where that dead cap money falls, but there's enough flexibility, right? Moving in the right direction. So Joe Schoen feels like he can really start to put his mark on this team from a roster construction standpoint, right? Because there's a lot of holdovers from the previous regime. And when a new GM comes in, when a new head coach comes in, those first couple of seasons especially, you start to see the slow turnover of the roster, bringing in their guys, their pieces, the players that they think can have a big impact. Let's look at James here. I love the idea of supplementing a tight end tossed up for a poor free agent for wide receivers. Great GM making lemonade. Yeah, listen, that's the other thing too, coming into this free agent period, right? Jacoby Myers, okay. Mentioned Alan Lazard earlier. Like, all right. I said, hey, DJ Shark may be a viable option depending on the price point, and some of them may be. But if you're just thinking about having a playmaker, Darren Waller is certainly a way that you can go, right? And again, having the extra draft capital affords you the ability to do this. Go ahead and hit up Tommy one last time here. Raiders bums. That's okay. Yeah, I know what you mean, man. But we move on from it because we don't worry about that. We worry about what we're doing. They say farm your own land, right? We don't worry about what they have to say there. Pistol back in the action. What better pass catcher was there available in trade or free agency? Probably none. Yeah, and that's, again, when these players become available and the reason why Waller becomes available, it's a combination, certainly the age, some of the injury concerns for him the last couple of seasons. But just like we're talking about Joe Schoen, Brian Dable, Mike Kafka, Wink Martindale wanting their guys, remember, you had a new head coach there in Vegas as well. He's bringing in now his guy from New England and Jimmy Garoppolo. He's bringing in his tight end from New England in Juno Smith, right? So you see how in free agency, sometimes these decks get shuffled here a little bit, and that's what affords the availability of a player like Darren Waller, someone that can still very much be productive, obviously. This isn't a one-to-one about the injuries or one-to-one about the money. It's about fit. It's about scheme and what you're looking to accomplish as you restructure your roster. Raiders are doing it. Giants get to be the beneficiary of that in this particular offseason. Bring up, well, it's an interesting name there. We'll bring up TS. I'll call you TS. Not that it's a bad name, but it's interesting. The tight end class is deep and talented, so the Raiders also a win for them. Waller's injury prone. And listen, I understand where you're coming from, probably a Raiders guy. The tight end class is deep. And that's great. But we were talking about this previously as well. For Giants fans, you're talking about, a tight end class that, yes, there's talent. But the question was, do the Giants go and get a tight end in the first round where there are talent? No, because you don't want to have you having a fifth-year option on any player is great, but you want to have that fifth-year option at a high position of value. So being able to go out and get a guy at any point is certainly valuable, but there's a difference between what you can do and then what the results will be. Daniel Bellinger looks like he's going to pan out in a great way for the Giants. Joshua Ezeudu, who the Giants went up and got, hey, he may pan out, but that was something that you say, hey, we're spending important draft capital here on a possibility. Darren Waller, if healthy, is not a possibility. he's a guarantee that he's going to be productive for the New York Football Giants and for this team. Waller was number 58 of the top 100 voted by the players last year. That is a fantastic stat, my friend. Thank you very much, Ross, for being in on the conversation. So let's put it in that context too. Take away position, take away contracts, all that stuff. By the players, and we understand that Waller had injuries last year, by the players' account, Darren Waller is a top 60 NFL player. There's never a bad time to add a top 60 NFL player to your roster. That's the bottom line, especially for a team in the Giants who have not been a team that has high caliber players at skill positions. You have Daniel Jones back in the fold. You have, hopefully, Saquon Barkley. They work out the extension, right? And now if you think about it from that standpoint, if you can get Robinson healthy, you know he's dynamic if healthy, when healthy, right? So now you have Wan'Dale Robinson in his second year. You have an experienced veteran in Darren Waller. You have a player in development that's already shown you that he's capable of quite a lot going forward in Daniel Bellinger. And now you have Saquon Barkley in the backfield, Matt Breida in the backfield. This is good. This is what you want. Like, this is what you need to do if you want to continue to move this team forward and stay competitive, by the way, in a very competitive East division, right? The NFC East is not going to be a cakewalk for any of these teams. But for the New York Football Giants to stay competitive, for the New York Football Giants to have been a playoff team and then continue to be a playoff team, you have to find a way to improve the roster. You have to find a way to be able to score, something we know. The Giants had their ebbs and flows when it came to that. Reset the table one last time for everybody coming in here. Really appreciate it. Looks like we could crest over 100 people in on our live session right now, which is absolutely awesome. If you're new to the room and the conversation, feel free to hit that like, hit that subscribe, turn on the alerts so that you get the updates when we're going live and putting out some, hopefully, really enjoyable content for everybody. Darren Waller from the Las Vegas Raiders to the New York Football Giants in exchange for the compensatory third-round pick, 100 overall, received in the trade with the Kansas City Chiefs for Kadarius Toney in season. I'm a Raiders fan. Waller wasn't really hurt. He was faking much of the injuries. There was something else going on there. He wanted to get paid. Interesting. That's an interesting one to throw out there. What I'll take away from it, and I thank you for coming in as a Raiders fan and doing it respectfully, not coming in with any hate or trying to make a mess of a good conversation for Giants fans. I'll tell you what, if Darren Waller was frustrated about something and it wasn't injury related, that's another feather in the Giants' cap, because it means that maybe this past season wasn't just about a player that, last couple of years has missed some games and has some real injury concerns coming in. I don't know. Maybe we'll hear something about that. And obviously, if you're Darren Waller, I mean, it'd be hard for me to think that he was talking about wanting to get a new contract, one that started in 2022 with the Raiders. He's already making $11.165 million. This contract runs through 2026. Had 19, interestingly enough, would be like has 19.25 million guaranteed at signing. Maybe he wanted a little bit bigger signing bonus. That I would certainly understand from Waller's standpoint. Remaining 2.75 million of the 2023 salary fully guarantees on March 17th. So that's coming up here momentarily. So there'll be some guaranteed money going his way. And then he has built in $75,000 active bonuses, 1.275 million in 2022, treated as a signing bonus. So there's just some of the other little like footnotes around the contract. But listen, I love it. I love the world where Darren Waller was maybe just looking in a situation where the Raiders were changing directions, going a different way, new coach, going to be new quarterback, all those things. Hey, you go and you pay, a big time player, an elite number one wide receiver like Devontae Adams, and you say, I've been here being productive. Where's my cut of cheddar? Listen, come on over to Big Blue. We'll take care of you here. We'll go ahead and just roll through. Tommy, back in the action. Waller after the catch and separation rate is top notch. That's another big benefit here too, right? One thing to be able to play over the top of defenses, one thing to be able to get open, another thing to be able to turn on the afterburners, to have enough speed, enough quickness, enough physicality to be able to shake off a safety and add those yak Obviously, yards after catch add those big play abilities here. Difference maybe between, if we think about just inside the Giants, room and who they have right now. Isaiah Hodgins really showed up and opened eyes last year for Giants fans and maybe for teams around the NFL. He comes back. I still love what he can do for this team, but I'm never going to mistake Isaiah Hodgins for being a guy that's going to catch a 15 to 20 yard route and then burn away from defenses and take it for a big gain, right? It's the thing that you dream on every single game with Saquon Barkley. Get the ball in his hands and see if he can make somebody miss and make moves. Wan'Dale Robinson, same exact thing. Get this guy in space, let him make some people miss and be productive after the catch. All of those things in the different ways in which the Giants can hopefully go about doing that with Mike Kafka and Daniel Jones. That's what you dream on for Darren Waller, being a guy that can do a lot of different things for you, can impact the game in a number of different ways, and hopefully be someone that gets put into the category of, hey, Darren Waller is a home run hitter for us in the passing game. Something that this team has greatly lacked and is going to need if you want to maximize Daniel Jones and if you want to maximize the ability to win games, whether, we talk about some comeback wins, game-winning drives. That's all fantastic. How about games where you're actually out in front? How about games where other teams have to chase you? And the fact that allows Wink Martindale and the defensive side of this New York Football Giants team to pin its ears back, to put pressure on opposing quarterbacks, and to be that much more disruptive on their side of the ball as well. So, impact when you bring in a player like this, whether it's through free agency or through a trade, you have to look at it from every single angle. And there's a lot of really good ones here. And let's get him in the building. Let's see him be healthy. Let's see him get back to being a consistent pass catching tight end that can be a dynamic playmaker from a couple of years ago, right? So it's not perfect. This wasn't the number one linebacker on the free agent market that the Giants went and spent big money on and said, hey, we've got a number one guy in our core here. No, they still have to figure out the right pockets to operate within if you're Joe Schoen. He did it at linebacker. I think it was smart on a 4 for 40. He did it now at tight end. I think it's smart with the contract that's there, the ways in which they can navigate it, and hopefully the way in which they can get the best sample out of Daniel Jones this upcoming season, knowing that it's a 4-year deal that hopefully looks like an incredible value. But after 2 years, there's the opportunity to get out of it. The only thing that you want to see if you're a Giants fan is that there's no reason to want to get out of it. But there's no reason to want to get out of the Darren Waller contract at any point either, right? We want these to be guys that over the next 3 and 4 years are going to be key contributors to this team having sustained success. That's what it's about. Watch, he will play the whole season now. Trust me, he wasn't happy with the Raiders. Been a Raiders fan for 42 years. Respect to you, man. And by the way, this is, I went through the same thing with Evan Ingram a year ago when the Giants weren't going to bring him back from a previous regime. He was going to walk in free agency. I said at the time, he's going to go wherever he lands. I will not be shocked if he has the best season of his career. And all I'll do is tip my cap and say, good for you. I want you to go on to have success. You're no longer a Giant. It doesn't affect me. And guess what? He went to Jacksonville, and that's exactly what happened. Had his best season of his professional career, got franchise tagged this upcoming season. He's going to have money to play with if they don't get an extension done with him. It's a part of football, right? 42 years, you said. You go through a lot of different iterations of the team. There's a lot of hard decisions that get made. Sometimes players either don't want to be here, want more money, want to change the scenery, whatever the case may be. So hopefully for the Giants fan base, it ends up being that version of, listen, I was done. My time with the Raiders had come to an end, and now I get to hopefully have a very successful chapter with the New York Football Giants. Those passes Bellinger dropped, Waller will not. Let's just be clear here. Daniel Bellinger had 35 targets and 30 catches. So, I mean, we're living in a very small margin here if we're talking about where Waller can improve on what Daniel Bellinger was doing. That being the case, again, the different skill set elevates your expectations for what he can be to this offense and how it can benefit Daniel Bellinger as well. Jack comes in with a gamble due to his health issues the past 2 years, almost 200 catches in 19 and 20, as we talked about, and over 1,100 yards in both those seasons. Yeah, 100%. That is why it's a player that, from a value standpoint, a third-round compensatory pick, you feel great about giving that up to get a player of his caliber. But the risk here is that maybe He is a guy that physically is going to is breaking down a little bit, that has some nagging injuries here in his past, and who's missed half of the games, right? If Darren Waller comes in and only plays in 7 games for the Giants, they may be 7 very productive games, but they'll also be another 10 games that we'll all be very frustrated that he's not out there to make those plays. But you have to be willing to take the risk. So again, we'll close it out by reiterating Darren Waller for the 3rd round compensatory 100 pick overall from the Raiders to the New York Football Giants, a player that, if healthy and on the field, is dynamic as anyone that the Giants have had inside of their receiving tight end room. He will open up a lot of different avenues for Wan'Dale Robinson, for Daniel Bellinger, for Saquon Barkley, for Daniel Jones to have success on Sundays. And there is the ability to get out of this contract if you so chose after just 1 year of service. Hopefully it's 17 games of health for Darren Waller, high-level production, and really helping Daniel Jones and this offense figure out what their ceiling can truly be. And by the way, before we break down in full what Darren Waller can be, we have to wait for the rest of the moves that the New York Football Giants make, because free agency isn't over and the draft isn't over. So we're talking about how he impacts the current constructed roster. There is at least going to be 2 wide receivers being added into this group in whatever combination of ways that Joe Schoen chooses to go about it. My friends, it's a busy day. And I thank each and every one of you for coming in and being a part of this conversation. We said we ducked up over 100 there for a minute. We're at 98 right now. Please support the podcast if you can over on YouTube by subscribing and turning on those alerts and sharing it with people. If you appreciate the content, you know a Giants fan, send them our way. We welcome them into the OGP family. You're over on the podcast feed as well, getting those wherever you get those needs. Just shout out to everybody, man. We say it every single time. I hope it doesn't feel redundant when we bring it up. We truly appreciate everybody that gets in on these conversations. We are Giants fans at our core. We want to have great discussions about this team, debate it, disagree about it, but ultimately it's about wanting this team to be as good as it can, wanting them to win as many games as possible, and give us some of those deep playoff runs that we remember from what feels like a very long time ago. Until next time, my friends, though, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know, as always, let's go Big Blue.